Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And I'll just warn you right up front, this one's pretty intense.
Yeah,
We are looking into the life and crimes of Freddrick Jackson. This is a young man who was convicted of multiple murders.
right.
And you've provided a lot of material on this case, police records, court documents, news reports. I mean, we've really got
Yeah.
a pretty in-depth look. And
Lots to dig into.
it seems like a very complicated situation. I mean, a teenager involved in, this string of violent crimes.
Well, and I think, it is important to acknowledge just right at the top that this is
Sure.
some serious, potentially disturbing stuff.
Right.
This isn't just a story. I mean, this is a real window into a pretty dark reality of youth violence.
Exactly.
And all these different factors that kind of contribute to something like this.
And we are going to approach it with the care that it deserves.
Well,
So why don't we just start with what we know about Jackson's early life? I mean, just going through these police records, it paints a picture of behavioral issues going back, I mean, really, really young.
Yeah, I mean, you see a pattern emerging, right? I mean, like very early on. I mean,
Mm.
at 11 years old, threatening an assistant principal.
Wow.
By 14,
Mhm.
involved in fights, resulting in injuries.
Yeah.
And what's striking is just sort of the escalating severity of
Mm.
these incidents. It suggests that maybe there were cries for help that went unanswered.
I'm looking at, I mean, charges of disorderly conduct, battery, even theft. I mean, this wasn't just, typical teenage rebellion.
Right.
It seems like a very consistent pattern of disruptive, and increasingly violent behavior.
Yeah, no question. And I think that's where, understanding the context of his life becomes so crucial. These early troubles really take on this whole new dimension
Hmm.
when you consider, the just devastating events that unfolded in Jackson's family.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2019, his uncle is fatally shot
Oh.
by a police officer. And then just a year later, his pregnant mother
Oh my
is
God.
also shot and killed.
I mean, that's just an unimaginable amount of trauma for anyone to process,
Right.
especially someone so young. So I am curious, about the potential impact of those events on a developing teenager, especially one who was already exhibiting these behavioral
Yeah,
problems.
well, trauma, especially during the teenage years, during
Yeah.
adolescence, I
Hmm.
mean, it can have a profound effect.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. A teenager's brain, it's still developing,
Right.
particularly, the parts that are responsible for emotional regulation and impulse control.
Mm.
Trauma can really disrupt that whole process, leading to, heightened anxiety, difficulty managing emotions, and a much greater risk of engaging in risky or dangerous behavior.
So in a sense, you're saying that these traumatic experiences, they could have exacerbated his existing behavioral issues,
Mm.
making it even harder for him to cope with his emotions and to make sound decisions.
Precisely. And when you layer onto that, the timeline of his crimes,
Right.
his first two victims, Nicholas Jones and Dyshawn Allen, they're murdered in June of 2020, just a few months after his mother's death. I mean, the potential connection between these events and his actions becomes even more compelling, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty chilling when you think about it that way.
It's a chilling thought. And there were two more victims after that, one in February of 21 and then Dolan Goff in April of 22. And what I find particularly disturbing is that Jackson was only 17 years old
Right.
when the mayor of Little Rock identified him as one of the, quote, most violent people in the city. I mean, that really speaks volumes about the severity of his crimes.
Absolutely. And, teenage serial killers, I mean, they're incredibly rare.
Yeah.
I mean, less than 1% of all serial killers fall into that category.
Wow.
And so, what makes Jackson's case even more intriguing, from a psychological standpoint, is just this rapid escalation in violence in such a short time.
Yeah, I'm definitely eager to hear more about your insights on that, especially, in relation to the potential role of trauma. I mean, what can you tell us about just the typical psychological profiles or risk factors that are associated with teenage serial killers? And then how does Jackson's case kind of compare?
Yeah, well, there's no single blueprint, for a teenage serial killer. Research does suggest, that a combination of factors usually contribute to their development.
Hmm.
And these often include, a history of severe abuse or neglect, exposure to violence at an early age,
Right.
and then also, undiagnosed, untreated mental health issues.
And I'm guessing that the trauma that Jackson experienced, that this could have amplified these existing
Oh,
vulnerabilities.
absolutely. I mean, trauma can act as a catalyst. It can push an already vulnerable individual down a much darker path. It's like adding fuel to a fire that's already smoldering.
So we're seeing this convergence of individual predispositions, severe trauma, and perhaps even some environmental factors at play
Oh,
here. I mean, this is where it really starts to get complex, right?
yeah.
It's rarely just one thing that leads to this level of extreme violence.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a web of interconnected factors.
Hmm.
And unraveling that web, I mean, that's essential to understanding cases like this.
Okay, so we have this young man with a history of escalating violence who then suffers these unimaginable losses. He ends up committing these four murders while still a teenager, ultimately leading to his conviction and sentencing.
Right.
But there's obviously a lot more to unpack here, particularly regarding, his legal outcome and the implications of his sentence.
Yeah, no question. And that's kind of where things take, I guess you could say, a bit of an unexpected turn.
Okay.
Um, in what was, a relatively swift resolution to the legal proceedings, Jackson actually pleaded guilty to all the charges against him.
All charges. I mean, that's pretty unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in a case of this magnitude. I mean, I would expect, some back and forth, plea deals, negotiations.
Right. You would think so.
Yeah.
It's not common to see guilty plea on all counts, in such a complex case as this. Um, it could suggest a few things, though. Maybe there was genuine remorse on Jackson's part, or perhaps a particularly strong case from the prosecution, or even maybe a calculated strategy from his defense team.
I'm particularly curious about that strategic angle. I mean, what sort of legal considerations might lead to a decision like that?
Well, imagine you're the defense attorney in this case.
Right.
I mean, you're facing overwhelming evidence. You've got this huge public outcry for justice, and a jury that's potentially going to be very swayed by just the horrific nature of these crimes.
Right.
So in that scenario, I mean, pleading guilty, it could be a way to avoid a really lengthy, emotionally draining trial,
Hmm.
and maybe even secure a slightly more lenient sentence.
Mm.
And it's a gamble, of course, but sometimes it's the best option that you have.
So what was the outcome of that gamble? What sentence did Jackson ultimately receive?
Jackson was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
Yeah.
He is currently incarcerated at the Wakita River Unit. That's a maximum security prison in Arkansas.
50 years. I mean, that's a long time, especially considering that he was so young when he committed these crimes.
Right.
It makes you think about the whole concepts of justice and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on the sentence, and what does it really mean for Jackson's future?
Well, it's a weighty question for sure.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers. Um, on the one hand, the sentence, I mean, it does reflect the gravity of his actions. 4 lives were lost.
Right.
The impact on the victims' families is immeasurable.
Of course.
Justice demands accountability. And a significant sentence like this, I mean, it acknowledges that pain and suffering that was caused by Jackson's crimes.
But then there's also the question of rehabilitation, right? I mean, is a 50-year sentence really conducive to helping a young man turn his life around?
Yeah, I mean, that's the heart of the debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
The goal of the criminal justice system, it should be to both punish and rehabilitate.
Right.
But how do we actually balance those objectives, especially when we're dealing with young offenders, who still have the potential for change?
It's a complex dilemma, and while trauma certainly doesn't excuse Jackson's actions, it definitely adds another layer of complexity to this whole conversation. I mean, makes you wonder if a system that's focused solely on punishment, can it truly address the underlying issues that contribute to youth violence?
That's a really crucial point. Punishment without rehabilitation, it's like putting a bandage on a wound without actually treating the infection. What we need to do is we need to invest in programs and resources that actually address the root causes of youth violence.
Oh.
Things like mental health services, educational support, community outreach initiatives. I mean, those are the types of things that we need to focus on.
So you're suggesting a more, holistic approach, one that kind of recognizes that interplay of individual choices, the systemic issues, and those tragic circumstances.
Exactly. It's about understanding that youth violence is a symptom of of deeper societal problems.
Yeah.
We need to create environments where young people, where they feel supported, where they feel empowered and connected to their communities.
This feels like a real call to action, not just for lawmakers and policymakers, but for all of us. I mean, what can ordinary citizens do to contribute to this effort?
Well, there's countless ways to make a difference. You can volunteer with organizations that work with at-risk youth. You can advocate for policies that address poverty and inequality, or simply just be a positive presence in the lives of young people in your community.
Yeah.
I mean, even small acts of kindness, I mean, they can have a ripple effect.
I think that's an important message to emphasize. I mean, we've spent this episode kind of delving into the darkness of Freddrick Jackson's case, but it's crucial to remember that we all have a role to play in preventing these types of tragedies
Right.
from happening in the future. This isn't just a story. This is a challenge to all of us to be more aware, to be more compassionate, and to be more proactive in
Absolutely.
creating a world where young people are given the support they need to thrive.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in, like the legal aspects of a case like this, but it's the human element that really stays with you.
Right.
We've talked about Freddrick Jackson's crimes, his sentence, the potential for rehabilitation. But what about the victims
Right.
and their families? I mean, their pain and loss are at the heart of this whole tragedy.
Absolutely. I mean, while Jackson's story is, it is compelling, it is crucial to remember that 4 lives were tragically cut short. Nicholas Jones, Dyshawn Allen, Dolan Goff, and then that unnamed victim.
Right.
Their stories matter too,
Absolutely.
and we need to acknowledge that just devastating impact of their loss, on their loved ones, their communities, and society as a whole.
It's a sobering reminder that every act of violence, I mean, it really has this ripple effect, It touches countless lives.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that question we've kind of been grappling with throughout this whole deep dive. How do we as a society address this issue of youth violence, especially in cases with these complex backgrounds, like Freddrick Jackson?
Well, and that's where, things get really, really interesting. I mean, if we kind of zoom out and we look at the bigger picture here, I mean, we see that Jackson's case, it's not an isolated incident.
Right.
It's a reflection of these much larger systemic issues
Right.
that contribute to these cycles of violence, especially in marginalized communities. I mean, we're talking poverty, lack of access to education and mental health resources, and the exposure to trauma, sometimes from a very young age.
So it's not just about holding individuals accountable for their actions. It's
Yeah.
about addressing those underlying social and economic conditions that create this kind of fertile ground for violence to flourish.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that we can't simply incarcerate our way out of this problem.
Right.
We need to invest in prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation programs that actually address the root causes of youth violence.
So what would that look like in practice? I mean, what kind of initiatives do you think could actually make a real difference here?
Well, imagine community centers that offer, after-school programs, mentoring, counseling services. Imagine schools with these really robust mental health support systems, that identify and address these early warning signs. Imagine a society that actually prioritizes, early childhood development and provides real tangible resources to families in need. I mean, those are the types of things that can make a real difference.
It sounds like a significant shift in perspective. I mean, a move away from punishment and towards prevention and support.
It is.
Yeah.
It is a major shift. And it requires a truly collective effort.
Yeah.
It's about communities coming together to create environments where young people, they feel safe, they feel valued, and they feel empowered. It's about recognizing that every child deserves a chance to thrive regardless of their background or their circumstances.
That's a powerful message to end on. This deep dive into Freddrick Jackson's case, it's been a journey into the dark side of human nature, but it's also kind of illuminated this path toward a brighter future. And it's shown us that while we can't undo the past, we can certainly learn from it.
Right.
And we can work together to prevent these future tragedies.
And to you listening, I mean, we encourage you to consider how you can contribute to this effort. I mean, it could be volunteering your time, donating to a relevant organization, or even just, having these really open and honest conversations
Yeah.
about these issues in your own communities. I mean, every action, no matter how small, can truly make a difference. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everybody.